Hi, welcome to Boarding Fundamentals, Part 4, Boarding Residence Procedures. The assessment is BF4. This is a written knowledge assessment, and you can do this in 3 different ways. You can write your answers onto a paper copy, scan it and send it to us. You can type into a Word copy on your computer and email that to us, or you can type straight into the Moodle online training program. So this is boarding residence procedures, all the different procedures that we use in the boarding residence. So we want to start off by looking at mission and vision and also policies and procedures. Boarding supervisors need to know the vision of the organisation, the mission. They need a clear job description, which is current and accurate. They need a code of conduct, and they need access to the policies and procedures. So what is vision and mission? And people often get these mixed up. So very simply, it's like this. The vision statement is the dreaming part. What do we want to achieve in the future? What are we aiming for in the future? The mission statement is the doing part. It's like a written declaration of our core purpose and focus, but it's also a statement of all the different things we do right now. Leaders understand that the vision and mission statements are critically important documents because they provide direction and purpose. These documents, vision and mission, provide direction and purpose for the organisation. So then we have policies, and these are statements about how the residence intends to conduct its actions. They're kind of overarching or guiding principles to set direction and to help with decision making, and they don't have to be hugely long. Policies are generally quite short. Procedures are strategies of how each policy will be put into action. So there's steps or actions, it's a timing or sequence, it's the different roles and responsibilities of different people, the materials and resources you'll need, safety and risk considerations, quality and performance standards, and then documentation standards, etc. So how do you access policies and procedures? Where are they in your workplace? Are they online? Do you have hard copies? Are they in the office? Are they on a particular drive? So are they specific to boarding? In some boarding residences, they'll have policies and procedures, but they apply more to the school. Are they current and relevant? Do they have a version control? Where are they kept and how can you access them? So next we want to look at routines, and routines are critically important in boarding. Why? Because they help students feel safe, they enable the smooth running of our programs, they reduce power struggles with staff, and they build self-control, good habits, resilience and mastery. So let's just have a look at a couple of these. They help students feel safe because they have these routines, they know about them, they know how they're going to work, so they feel safe and comfortable within these routines. They enable the smooth running of the program. The routines happen each day, and so the staff and the students know the routines. Reduce power struggles with staff. So you might have a young person saying to you, why are you asking me to do this? I think you're picking on me or you're giving me a hard time. And you can say, no, this is a routine, everybody does it. And it just reduces those power struggles. And building self-control, resilience, etc. When young people get into these routines, this builds resilience and it helps them to develop good habits for the future, for when they leave school. This is a typical routine, so if you have a look at that, probably very similar to what every boarding residence has got. Next we want to look at rosters. Effective staff rosters provide a high standard of care by having the right people and the right number of people for the time and the activity. There are different roster types. Regular weekly or fortnightly rosters where the same roster occurs each time, a cycle that starts and ends at different times within a time period, such as say a month, or a whole term with different patterns throughout the term. Another approach is used by airlines where staff bid for shifts so they earn credit or status for accepting unpopular shifts, and then they can bid for other shifts. There is rostering software available, and we did a review of heads of boarding, asking them what sort of software they used or if they use software at all.
We had 58 returns, and most heads of boarding do not use software. They do this manually on Excel or Word or something like that. Find My Shift software is all in one organisation. WageLock and Deputy are probably the next most popular. We looked at each of these and what we were wanting to find out is, do they have rostering timesheets, the ease of use, drag and drop function, etc. Award interpretation, time clock, so biometric and geolocation, time clock, notification options, integration with HR and payroll, and this is one of the great benefits of rostering software. Qualification renewal alert, so that when your qualifications are running out, such as a working with children's card, they would alert HR staff, and a staff leave portal. So one of the great benefits, of course, is that rostering software links in with your accounting package or other software. And this is typically what rostering software looks like. If you want more information about rostering, you can go to our blogs online, and there's a rostering software in boarding blog, and there's also a blog about fatigue and rosters.
4.4 Employment Awards and Agreements. These are legal documents that outline the minimum pay rates and conditions of employment, and there are more than 100 awards in Australia. So there will either be a national or state award for you, or a registered agreement underpinned by the award. So, state or federal awards, what's the difference? In Australia we have both. The coverage, state awards generally cover employees working in a particular state or territory, while national awards cover employees working across multiple states. Scope, state awards generally cover a narrower range of industries and occupations, which can cover a broader range of industries and occupation for national awards. Content, state awards and national awards might differ in terms of specific terms and conditions they set out, such as minimum wages, penalty rates, leave entitlements, all those sort of things. Enforcement, state awards are generally enforced by state industrial relations commissions, while the national awards are enforced by the Fair Work Commission, which is the National Industrial Relations Tribunal. So the award, the National Award, is the Educational Services Schools General Staff Award, National 2020. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But it's part of the modern awards from the Fair Work Commission. So you'll either be under that award, a state award, or a registered agreement. So that's an agreement between an employer and their employees regarding employment conditions, approved and registered by the Fair Work Commission, generally an enterprise agreement, or an IFA, which is an individual flexibility arrangement. This is what the award looks like. And Appendix 1 in BF Notes contains extracts from the Educational Services Schools General Staff Award 2020, extracts that are relevant to boarding supervisors. So what about registered agreements? Why have one? Modern awards cover a whole industry or occupation and provide a safety net of minimum pay rates and employment conditions, but enterprise agreements can be tailored to meet the needs of particular enterprises. An agreement must leave the employee better off overall when compared to the relevant award or state award. So which is yours? A national award, state award, a registered agreement? If you don't know, you probably should find out. 4.5 Staff Induction. Staff induction needs to be comprehensive and effective. Why is that? It's because the role is complex, there's so many different parts to the role, and it's serious because you're looking after and caring for other people's children. The induction prepares you to work safely and effectively, it provides good morale, etc., and there is a liability issue because the organisation need to make sure the staff induction is very thorough, because if there was an accident or if somebody was injured or killed because the induction was unsatisfactory, then the organisation could be liable. The induction should set the tone to be positive and enthusiastic. It should enable the new person to embrace the resident's culture. It should enable the organisation to learn the employee's story, their experiences, their strengths, what they can bring to the organisation, and it should enable the new person to meet everybody. Induction needs to be well planned and well managed. In most inductions, a new person would shadow an experienced boarding supervisor, possibly for a week, sometimes even longer. The induction should be tailored to the individual. It should be varied and interesting. In most inductions these days, there's a record of the induction, and the new person will sign off each part of the induction as a record. And there will be an induction feedback process where you can feed back to the organisation how you felt about the induction. At the induction, you should be given policies and procedures, workplace health and safety information, plans of the building and grounds, rosters, codes of conduct, boundaries, duty of care, student rules, etc. And a lot of these things will be in your handbook, in your staff handbook. You should also be given keys, codes and alarms, and you should be given information about evacuation and lockdown drills. 4.6 Staff Performance Appraisals. And these are also called reviews, staff performance reviews. So the benefit of appraisals or reviews gives you one-to-one time with management, gives you feedback on your performance, which is important. It sets training and development goals, which is also an important part of appraisals or reviews, and it builds motivation and job satisfaction. But the review or appraisal is just one part of a holistic performance management process. It isn't a standalone review or appraisal, and that's because you have this week-to-week engagement with the head of boarding and the supervisor to develop and manage role descriptions, to progress work objectives, consider achievements and provide feedback on performance. So there's no saving up feedback for the performance appraisal. This happens on a week-to-week basis if there is feedback. Now, typically a boarding supervisor would go through an appraisal or a review once a year. A head of boarding or a principal would have an appraisal or a review every 2 to 3 years. There's 3 different types, and the first is self-evaluation, and it's most likely you'll do this sort of appraisal. So a self-evaluation is where the employee reviews their own performance against a list of employee expectations. And this template would include factors such as work knowledge, work performance, attitude, leadership qualities, team player behaviour, consistency, decision making, depending on your boarding context. It's different for each context. And then once you've done this self-evaluation, it would be reviewed by the head of boarding, and the head of boarding and supervisor would discuss previous goals and action, discuss the supervisor's self-evaluation, and then develop new goals and actions which often include training or professional learning. The process is documented and then it's signed off by the employee and the manager. Other types are peer evaluations. This is where peers also contribute to the performance appraisal, either by completing the template, by interview, or by both. A 360-degree appraisal approach is where you get a representative group of all those people involved with the employee, peers, managers, parents, students, school staff, ancillary staff, and they all contribute to the employee's performance appraisal. This is the most detailed and complete picture of an employee's performance, but you can see that it's complex and it's time consuming, and for this reason it's usually utilised for more senior staff. So that is performance appraisals or reviews. 4.7, performance management, and this is quite different to an appraisal or a review. This is a process where the supervisor's performance is being intentionally managed to bring about change or learning. And possible reasons why this is occurring is because the person is new to the job and they're developing skills. They might have a changed role, but nearly always it's because of unsatisfactory performance, so underperformance or misconduct. In the performance management, goals are set for performance, and these are usually time oriented, so complete this by such and such a week or by the end of this week, and then performance is monitored against those goals. So let's look at underperformance. This is not carrying out work to the required standard, not doing the job at all, not following workplace policies, rules or procedures, unacceptable behaviour such as telling inappropriate jokes, disruptive or negative behaviour or negative talk about the organisation. And typically for underperformance, the result is a letter of warning to the employee, to the boarding supervisor. And then we have serious misconduct. And this is serious risk to health and safety, either of yourself or other employees, or in your case, even the students. Risk to reputation or the profits of the business, or behaviour that's inconsistent with continuing employment. For serious misconduct, a supervisor could be immediately stood down. So examples of serious misconduct are refusing to carry out duties, risk to self and others, assault, being drunk at work, theft or fraud. Let's just have a look at letters of warning. Letters of warning are given out where conduct is unsatisfactory, and the letter of warning should contain the purpose of the letter, the outline of the specific issue, an explanation of the consequences, guidance for improvement, and a deadline. And so often employees are given several letters of warning before their employment is terminated. There's no set number, but the idea is that the employee or the boarding supervisor is given adequate opportunity to change their practice, change their behaviour so that it is satisfactory. 4.8 is student induction. And so these are new students being inducted into the school. And so typically you would see this in an induction and assembly, a welcome to country, staff introductions, motivation and inspiration, trying to motivate the young people, get them excited about being at your boarding residence, talking about activities, camps, sports, who to talk to if there's a problem, making friends for life, all of those sort of things, a residence tour, site safety, security, alarms, room features, unpacking, etc. On a second day, you might do these sort of things, a tour of the local town, student representatives and how to contact, an excursion calendar, weekly activity schedule, all these sort of things are the sort of things that you might do on the second day. And you'll see there's an assessment for student induction. And so this is to a group of new Year 7 students. And the idea is that you're very enthusiastic and you try and get the young people enthusiastic about being in your residence, and you would say things like this in your welcome speech. You would welcome them for a start, an introduction, acknowledge their feelings. You could feel this is new, scary, etc. The positives about boarding, try and motivate them, the highlights, the activities, and bring on achievers and role models. So just being enthusiastic and connecting with young people. The positives of boarding, things to get young people enthusiastic about, could be these sort of things. And some of these things people have actually said to us. They said you can make lifelong friendships. You can focus on support and have support with your study. There's a wide range of activities and interests. You can meet a diversity of people broader than your own community. You can learn teamwork and cooperation. There's leadership opportunities. There's development of sporting and other skills. And you can talk to them about different excursions, special things that you do in your boarding residence, the sporting opportunities, all the good and exciting things about being in your residence. So that's student induction.
Section 4.9, facilitating acceptable behaviour. You probably think that should be something like managing student behaviour, but the reality is that students should manage their own behaviour, and our role is to help them do that, help them by facilitating acceptable behaviour. And the first part of that is developing and maintaining positive, supportive, caring relationships with students. Research has shown us that the likelihood of a student complying to a request depends on these things: the politeness of the request, the legitimacy of the request, the closeness of the relationship, and credibility. When we talk about legitimacy of a request, you can imagine, say, a student throwing rubbish on the ground and then you asking another student to pick that rubbish up. It's not really a legitimate request. Credibility, that's being competent, smart, in touch, being trustworthy, keeping confidences, etc. And being a genuine, caring person is all about credibility. If we look at student behaviour, it ranges from positive, inclusive, respectful behaviour to serious behaviours of concern. And so here are those four types of behaviour on a table: positive, inclusive, respectful behaviour, the sort of behaviour we really want to see from students. And We address this by identifying it, recognizing it, encouraging that sort of behavior. Low level, age appropriate misbehaviors. This might be students just being noisy or rowdy or loud. They're not really misbehaving as such. It's just the sort of behaviour you would expect from that age level of students. So what do we do about it? We redirect and we minimise through universal behaviour support strategies, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Challenging and disruptive behaviours. This is where a student refuses to follow instructions. A student might be using abusive language or something like that. And these are challenging and they can be very disruptive. We use universal behaviour support again, and we use targeted responses to that actual behaviour, and that might include things like consequences. Serious behaviours of concern. This could be things like assaulting and injuring another student, bringing alcohol onto the school grounds, something like that. We use a functional behaviour assessment to try and understand why the behaviour occurred, and individual and intensive behaviour plans. We would be collaborating with the head of boarding, the school principal, and parents, of course, all through that. Universal strategies include explicit teaching of expectation, and we do that through these tables here, and where we explicitly teach our expectations of behaviour, and we involve the students in setting up these matrices or tables. Universal strategies for all young people include clear boundaries, high rates of acknowledgement and I guess encouragement for expected behaviours or positive behaviours, consistent routines, effective engagement and active supervision. And here you can see how we can set up these tables with the students. Here's another one for boarding. And when we're doing these, we need to checklist these things. Was your matrix developed with the students? Are your settings relevant to your context? Have you used positive language? Is the language understandable and acceptable in your school community? Have you included social, emotional and behavioural skills in these matrices as you make them up and as you are working with the students to really understand your expectations for behaviour? Let's look at aggressive and violent behaviour. To anticipate aggressive behaviour before it occurs, we need to be observant and engaged, need to be moving around amongst the students. We need to be alert to the signs of tensions. We need to have relationships with the students, professional relationships, where we know and understand students and we're aware of triggers. When we respond to hostile communication, we should remain mirror calm, respond professionally, use empathy, it soaks up tension, and don't take it personally. When we're responding to escalating behaviour, we need to get in early. We use this model, and this model seeks to identify the different stages of escalation and the opportunities and strategies to intervene and to address escalation as early as possible. So if you look at this model, you'll see that these 6 stages: a default stage with underlying triggers and traumas, a pre-escalation stage, escalating behaviours, the signs, full escalation, de-escalation and post-escalation. And you can see them in this diagram here, this model. So the first is the default stage, and in the default stage, this is just how the student acts and behaves in an everyday situation. But there may be underlying triggers, there may be underlying trauma. And then we go on to the pre-escalation stage. So something has probably triggered the student. And if you can address this escalation at this stage, at this very early escalation stage, that's the ideal time. And then we have stage 3, the student actually escalating, and we should be trying to address the behaviour then. The fully escalated student, de-escalation as they're de-escalating, and this can take some time, can take up to 30 minutes, and post-escalation, what do we do after this event? So there's the 6 stages. Now, de-escalation goes against our natural fight or flight response. And often when a student is starting to escalate, it can be very annoying. It can make us quite cross because they may be swearing, they may be agitated, they may be not following instructions, etc. And we need to make sure that we have a calm, strategic approach, and that we don't just fly off the handle. So because it goes against the natural fight and flight, we need to learn and practice de-escalation. Every incident of escalating behaviour will be different, and the model will have a different shape for each incident. So escalation for some young people can occur very rapidly with minimal signs of pre-escalation, and so you can see that model there. It's happened very quickly over a matter of probably even seconds. Full escalation only lasts for a short time, usually, maybe 1 to 5 minutes, but for some young people it can continue for a lot longer, even as long as 20 minutes. Where a young person is fully escalated. In any escalation event, there are multiple opportunities to intervene and respond, and we really should be trying to respond as early as possible. There are preventative measures that we can use in a default stage, and that includes building strong relationships, foster trust, show genuine care and interest towards students, practice active listening, acknowledge student concerns without judgment, use student names and personalised interactions, set clear expectations up front, ensure students understand your behavioural expectations and consequences for not following those expectations, model the desired behaviours, use positive reinforcement, highlight and reward appropriate behaviours, create a supportive environment, so minimise triggers, reduce environmental stresses, provide structured routines, predictable routines, help reduce anxiety, offer flexible options, adjust tasks or activities to meet individual needs. Teach self-regulation skills, encourage emotional awareness, help students identify and express their feelings constructively, provide coping strategies, use visual aids such as emotion indicators. De-escalation strategies include remain calm and professional. Sometimes this can be very hard in an escalating situation, but we need to remain calm and professional. Remove any cause of the aggression, and often this can be another student. Keep distance, don't block people in who are upset. Low and slow, so this is low and slow with both your body physically, so you get down to the level of the student, and low and slow with your voice as well. Open, relaxed body language. Ask what would make them feel safer or better. Ask what could help or happen next. Don't be judgmental, and name it to tame it. So naming emotions helps young people gain control. Regulate, so regulate behaviour or emotions over education. This is not a time to be educating a young person. It is time to help them regulate themselves. Ignore challenging questions. Give space and time and allow for movement. Remember before we said that it can take up to 30 minutes for somebody to de-escalate. Sometimes it can take longer. Validate a young person and show empathy. Now, there's a lot more in de-escalation, and we've written a whole paper on it. And if you want to see this paper, it's on the blog section of the website. And we're also going to be producing a video as well. So responding to escalating behaviour, if you need a lot more detail in this area, then go to that blog. Physical restraint and intervention. Restraint is the use of physical force to prevent, restrict or subdue the movement of a student's body or part of their body. They're not free to move away. Intervention is to block, deflect, redirect or disengage grip, but the student can just move away. Physical restraint is only used in exceptional circumstance where there is real and immediate risk of injury to themselves or to others. There's no less restrictive measure to use, and it's reasonable response to prevent harm. So only where there is real and immediate risk of the student harming themselves or harming somebody else. And in my career, which goes back to the 70s, my teaching career, which goes back to the mid-70s, I've probably only done this 3 times. And the first time I did this is when a child was about to stab another child with a wood chisel. And so I had to intervene immediately and physically restrain this student. If I hadn't done it, the other child would have been stabbed. So only where there is real and immediate danger. You don't do this if there's a risk of injury to yourself. Ensure your actions are consistent with policies and procedures, and it's good to do some PD training around this. Most organisations prohibit physical restraint that covers a student's mouth or nose or in any way interferes with breathing, takes a student to the ground in a prone or supine position, applies pressure to the neck, back, chest or joints, applies pain to get compliance, intentionally causes a student to fall, includes sitting, lying or kneeling on a student. And again, I would just say that this would really only happen in exceptional circumstances, and hopefully it won't happen to you. Hopefully it won't be necessary in your career.
4.10, responding to suicide risk or self-harm. So let's look at self-harm first of all. It is not just attention seeking. It's letting others know that they are not coping. It does not necessarily lead to suicide, but it can be an indicator of being at risk of suicide. Some people explain this as a person having so much pain, so much suffering inside themselves, maybe from past traumas, that some sort of external injury, such as a cut or some sort of self-harm, can distract from that internal pain. So that's how people explain self-harm. With suicide, if this topic is too personal or upsetting for you, please feel free to walk away for a while. Suicide can occur without warning, but more often there are verbal or non-verbal clues, and we call these indicators. There may be a history of personal problems, warning signs, mental health illness, suicide threats, or prior attempts. So how could we know? How would we know that a student is at risk of suicide? It's usually because somebody has told us. The student themselves has told us, or another student, or another adult, but somebody has told us. The other way is you observe indicators, so behaviour or demeanour of the student. And these are some indicators: pulling away from friends, suddenly in trouble at school or boarding, talking about death or suicide, having trouble concentrating or thinking clearly, changing sleep or eating habits, giving away belongings, sudden change in behaviour, especially calmness after a period of anxiety, losing interest in activities, self-destructive behaviours, talking about feeling hopeless or guilty. So how do we respond to a threat of suicide or self-harm? Always take the indicators very seriously. Safety of the student is an absolute priority. We want to look at this in 2 ways. Firstly, if the student appears to be down, and secondly, if the student is a possible suicide risk. So firstly, if the student appears to be down or they appear to be depressed or not themselves, what do? We observe carefully, make sure the student is not left alone, listen carefully to what the student is saying, access support, particularly professional support if it's available, monitor the student all the time. Now, if the student remains down, appears depressed or gets worse, or shows any of the suicide risk indicators, proceed immediately to regard this student as a suicide risk. Now, if a student is a possible suicide risk, if you believe a student is a suicide risk, first and foremost, refer to your procedure. So your boarding residence procedure, if you've come to a belief that a student is a possible suicide risk. The first thing you do is you can ask this student very directly, are you thinking of taking your own life? And that is, if it is appropriate in your role, there might be somebody else who maybe should be doing this, somebody more senior to you, or if possible, a person who is a counsellor, a psychologist, a nurse, a health professional. But what you do if you believe that a student is a suicide risk is to ask if you think they're going to take their own life. And then obviously you would make a judgment from their response. So if you said this to a student and a student said, oh no, I've just been feeling down lately because my mum has got cancer and I'm just very upset about it, and I would never think of doing anything like that, then possibly the student is not a suicide risk, possibly. But if you said that, if you ask a student that question, are you thinking of taking your own life, and they said, oh well, things have been terrible lately, I just feel so hopeless about stuff, well, you would definitely regard that student as a suicide risk. So do not leave the student alone at all, and that means to even go to the toilet. So if they want to go to the toilet, stand outside the toilet and talk to them. Make sure they're not in there for a long period of time. Advise the boarding manager and anybody else who needs to know, but most importantly, get professional assistance immediately. Now that might mean a nurse who's on site, if you've got an on-site nurse or somebody who's on site who can help. Otherwise it would mean getting the student to hospital. Now, before the student returns to the residence, so if they've gone off to the hospital or off to see somebody, then make sure that the following are in place before the student returns: a risk assessment plan or a risk assessment process, and a safety plan. You need a risk assessment plan and a safety plan for the student before they return to the residence. And you continue that effective long-term support and monitoring of the student. If the student leaves the residence, goes home, goes back to a community or whatever, ensure that there is comprehensive dialogue with the family and all relevant community support. So anybody in the community who could be or should be supporting the student. So make sure that people are aware that the student has gone back and that you're concerned about them. 4.11, identifying and addressing student needs. For decades, people have looked at human needs, tried to list human needs, work out which needs are more important than others, etc. One of these was Max Neef. He was an economist from Chile, and he said human needs are all interrelated and interactive, and this is from Being Human, and you can see his list of needs there and the way he represented needs. Another famous person looking at needs is the psychologist Maslow, and he had a hierarchy of needs. So he said you have these basic needs which have to be met first, and these are physiological needs, so the need for air, the need for food, the need for water, those sort of things, going up to self-actualization. So that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But when we're identifying student needs, how do we do that? What are our primary sources of information? And it's documents such as an enrolment form, including medical forms, medical information, documentation from boarding, such as handover notes, incident reports, special needs reports, student profiles, observations or screening, conversations with students, parents, other students, the nurse, the teacher, counsellors, etc. You can even get information from feedback and from complaints, from formal documents such as case plans, student safety plans, student management plans. So all of these are documents where you can get information about a student to help meet their needs. So this is about identifying their needs so you can then address their needs. You can also use a form like this self-monitoring form. This is where a student will indicate a number on this form from 1 through to 10. So 1 is very bad, obviously, 10 is very good. And you usually do this in a group. So students sit around in a group and do this. Do you feel safe here? And they'll put down a 1, 2, 3, right up to 10. Do you feel happy here? Do you feel cared for? And people adjust or amend these forms to suit their own boarding residences. So that's how we can recognise, or we can find out what student needs are, what individual student needs are. But then we need to address these needs or meet these needs. And this can be done basically in 3 ways, I guess. You may be able to meet the needs of the student yourself. So if a student is homesick, or if they have some fairly basic need, you may be able to meet that need yourself as a boarding supervisor. There may be other people in the boarding residence who can address that need, like a boarding residence nurse or a psychologist or a counsellor, or you may have to refer that student outside the boarding residence to a person, a professional who is outside the residence. So that could be a health professional, a doctor, a medical service, a hospital. It could be mental health, it could be a counsellor, it could be a psychologist, psychiatrist, anybody like that who can help us address the student needs. Sometimes you'll need to collaborate to meet the needs of a student, so work with the student and the family. So the steps in this collaboration process are to research and to check relevant current information. So this is information such as what the student's needs are, and then what's available to meet their needs. And then you would discuss the rights and the options with students and parents. What's their first choice to meet these needs, identify the preferred options, identify any barriers and resources, any strengths. It's important to have a strength-based approach to meeting the needs of young people. When we talk about a strength-based approach, we're talking about looking at what are the young person's strengths and how can we involve those strengths in meeting the student's needs. So if you're looking at a young person's strengths, that could be something like their skills, but it could also be their relationships. They might have a very strong relationship with their grandmother or their football coach or something like that. They might be very skilled at sport or art or some sort of skill, and you can use those strengths to help meet their needs. Then you contact the most appropriate supports or services, and you utilise those services to meet the student's needs. And of course, after that, you would then evaluate how all that worked. Sometimes we're unable to meet students' needs, and that's because it's outside the experience, the skills or knowledge of staff. It's not met by the programs that we currently have. It's not catered for in our physical environment, our buildings, our grounds, etc. It's not covered by our procedures. And so what are the options then? The alternatives are to retrain or employ additional staff, to bring in trained external people, to refer to outside professionals such as doctors, headspace, as we talked about before, psychologists, counsellors, health professionals, redesign our programs, adjust procedures, change the environment somehow, or the bottom line is that if we can't do any of those, the student may need to move to a more suitable boarding school or boarding residence. In looking at student support, all students should feel confident to approach with a need or issue. They should have at least one member of staff who they feel really comfortable or confident to go to if they have a need or an issue. And it's good too to have an external advocate. So in a boarding school, that could be somebody in the school. If you've got a boarding residence, that might be somebody who's outside the residence, somebody's on the board, or some sort of external advocate. So it's it's good to have an arrangement like that. Supervisors should recognise when they're not qualified or when they're not able to assist a student with an issue, and not try to do it if they know that they're not qualified or able. 412, motivating students. Different things motivate different students, and if we have effective professional relationships, this helps us understand what will motivate a young person. There's two basic types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic comes from within, when a person or a young person is self-motivated to do something. So for example, my son loves running and exercise, etc. And the motivation for that doesn't come from a reward or from somebody paying him. It comes from within him. It's intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is motivation from outside, such as those rewards or positive comments, etc. If you're looking at what will motivate, rewards will motivate students for basic tasks, but for higher level tasks, then we need more intrinsic motivators. So that is a task that is a challenge, a task that provides mastery, and mastery is learning something, mastering something, so mastering playing the guitar or a sport or mastering some skill, or making a contribution to your residents or to society generally. So they are higher level tasks and more intrinsic motivators. 413, encouraging. It's important for us to encourage the students we work with. So giving support, confidence or hope, we should take every opportunity we can to encourage the boarders that we work with. So how do we encourage them? I think the first and most important thing is to show a genuine interest in what is important to them, what interests them. And young people know when we're doing that. Take time, give feedback, do nice, unexpected things for young people, acknowledge their feelings, take notice, say well done, congratulations, thank you, etc.
The next section is about advocacy. So what is it? Advocacy is when you publicly support or represent or speak up for somebody. So a student might ask you to advocate on their behalf to the head of boarding, to go to an event or to organise something special. It does differ from mediation and negotiation. So negotiation is having a discussion aimed at coming to an agreement. So you might be talking to another boarding supervisor and negotiating a roster, who's going to be there on the weekend, so negotiating out a roster, and this might require both of you to move from your positions. Mediation requires an external person to mediate between two groups or two people to resolve a dispute. So in mediation and negotiation, the people both move from their original positions to a new position acceptable to both of them. The mediator or the negotiator is impartial, but the role of the advocate is not impartial. The advocate is not asking for the student to move to a new position. They are asking for something for the student, and it's different to negotiation and mediation. Advocacy strategies include these things: building strong relationships and a base of credibility, gathering information, setting clear goals, being professional and respectful, knowing policies and laws, communicating effectively, involving the student in the advocacy, influencing through established relationships, seeking additional support if necessary. Negotiation strategies include these: preparing thoroughly, identifying common goals, building a relationship, focus on interests, not positions, communicate clearly and assertively, offer solutions and be flexible, control emotions, use evidence and examples, consider multiple perspectives, and stay solution-oriented. Mediation strategies include creating a safe and neutral environment, lowering the emotional temperature, listening actively, remaining impartial, setting ground rules, identifying the underlying issues, encourage empathy, brainstorm solutions, evaluate and prioritise solutions, reaching a consensus, and maintaining confidentiality. So they are strategies for advocacy, negotiation, and mediation. Self-advocacy. So this is the ability of a student to advocate for themselves, to speak up for themselves, to say what they think and feel, speak up for the things they believe in, know their rights, and take responsibility for their own lives, make decisions that affect their own lives. So why would we encourage self-advocacy? Because it empowers the student for future life. They're going to have to do this when they leave your boarding environment. So how can we support a young person to self-advocate? Help them understand their rights, provide information, practice what to say, set up a trial. So, have a trial where they can actually advocate, identify any barriers, keep confidential, and discuss the results afterwards. Steps in mediation. So this is between two parties who have some kind of dispute. Meet with each separately and understand the issue. Come together and share and identify interests. Have a summary, mediate a summary, brainstorm options and solutions. Have some sort of settlement or choose an option, agree. You might have to get people to sign an agreement or a deal, etc. So there's steps in mediation. Student leave procedure. We must know where the students are at all times, so we need a good, robust leave procedure. There's two types of leave: short leave to go on shopping trips or to go to the movies, longer leave where you might go overnight or for the weekend or even longer. Leave is not an automatic right, so leave may not be granted if the student has commitments, if the student is grounded, if the host is not approved by the parents, or if the residence knows that it's unsafe. So the students want to go to a particular house, the residence knows that there's going to be a party there on the weekend, and there may be drugs and alcohol. They may say it's unsafe and they may not approve leave. Most organisations in Australia have a digital student management system to manage leave, and that is usually Reach. So most organisations have Reach. Some boarding residences still have a manual sign-in, sign-out process, or a book, or a magnetic board, or something like that. But every organisation has some sort of leave procedure. So there's Reach, and the other process is Aura. So that's also a digital process for managing leave. Reach does a lot more than just managing leave. It has lots more add-ons, and it's actually a very useful piece of software. So with the leave process, the residents will require a sign-out list of people who are approved by parents, and that usually happens at the start of the year when young people are being enrolled. And then the steps in a leave procedure generally include these: the student requests leave, the host agrees for leave, the head of boarding contacts parents to request permission, the head of boarding makes sure the student doesn't have sanctions such as grounding or other commitments, head of boarding approves leave, student signs out when leaving, student signs in when returning. This next section is about managing digital devices, and digital devices in boarding can be quite problematic. So firstly, we want to look at ways of managing student phones, and what we've seen around Australia is the three main ways that staff manage phones. In some instances, students all self-manage phones, so they'll keep them at night, and there's a responsible use agreement, and staff will monitor phone use and keep students accountable to their agreement. Other places will collect all phones at bedtime and return after breakfast or even after school if phones are banned at school. Or seniors self-manage and juniors hand it in at night, and that's probably the most common process that we see. Searching and confiscating a student's phone. We don't believe that you should search a phone, that is, look at the content of a student's phone, and there's a number of reasons why we think that that's wrong. You should not search a student's phone. If you have got reasonable belief that the phone contains evidence of breaking the law or a policy, you can confiscate a student's phone, but you should have a specific statement in the policy that regulates student devices and also talks about confiscating students' phones. If you're going to remove a student's phone or other device, Your actions should be consistent with the school policy, and there should be some sort of agreement with parents. You should have the support of the head of boarding for your actions. And there should be reasonable grounds for your actions as well. If you're concerned about something illegal on a phone, involve another supervisor to put the device in a secure place. Keep it in view of the students until it's put in a safe place, like in an envelope in a safe, or if you're handing it over to the police until the police arrive. And you may have to report to an appropriate department for state mandatory reporting laws. Searches and confiscation of student properties. What can be confiscated? How long can it be confiscated? To whom should it be returned? So there should be policy around this. Parents should be aware of the policy and should agree to it. And this usually occurs during the enrolment process. There's different processes for different items, of course. A phone, for example, you would return to the student at the end of the period. From when it was confiscated. Tobacco products or alcohol are disposed of or given to parents. Weapons or illegal substances are usually passed on to the police. Again, digital device content. Staff do not have the right to open and inspect the contents of phones or other devices. It's a matter for parents or the police or regulatory bodies. And you've also got to remember